Tonight on TAOFLEDERMAUS, we take a look at the QB-8, the Anti-Matériel shotgun round. You're watching TAOFLEDERMAUS, your exclusive source for the most exotic shotgun rounds in the world. The QB-8 round, along with the QB-Slug, were introduced around 1995 by MK Ballistic Systems. The purpose of the shells were to disable light vehicles, boats, and even airplanes. Both of these shells are similar in appearance and similar in function. Now each shell uses 8 hardened steel wedges that they call quadrangles. For the QB-8, these are just packed loosely into the shell, so they fly similar to buckshot. But for the QB-Slug, the 8 quadrangles are bound together with a resin adhesive, so the wedges don't separate until impact. The QB-8 was marketed towards law enforcement as sort of a super buckshot. These were designed to penetrate not only soft body armor but also light metal armor. The projectile weight of the QB-8 shells were considerably lighter than the double-aught buck, but the velocity was considerably higher at over 1,550 feet per second compared to around 1,250 for lead buck, but the effective range for each is still only 25 meters. Once the quadrangles penetrated the skin of a car, for example, the sharp hardened steel edges would take out hoses and wiring. In order to understand why these were even invented, you have to understand what tools were available to the police at the time. Yes, there were SWAT teams in the mid-1990s who had rifles available to them, but the average cop had his sidearm, sometimes semi-automatic, but they were still using revolvers at the time. And if they needed anything heavier than that, they had their good old 12-gauge pump-action riot gun mounted inside their cruiser. So it seemed completely logical to supply these guys with a more advanced shotgun round. But the QB-8 still had its limitations, especially with an effective range of only 25 meters. The North Hollywood shootout in 1997 was a wake-up call for police as they learned they were outranged, outgunned, and out-armored by criminals. Tactics and tools changed quickly.
Welcome back, TAOFLEDER folks. Jeff and Officer Greg back out here with you on a ridiculously windy day. So before we get blown away, we're going to introduce the QB-8 Quadrangle Buck. This was a popular round with law enforcement in the early 90s, but essentially, imagine the slug being cut into 4 pie shapes. So it makes some sharp angles, and those sharp angles are designed to cut and destroy material. Things like wires and hoses and electronics and whatnot, to shut down cars and other vehicles, stuff like that. So
airplanes and boats, they claim, yes.
Right, not so much an anti-personnel round, but more of an anti-material round. So we're going to throw it into the old Winchester, or whatever this is, Weatherby, Winchester, clack, clack. And we're going to fire it downrange at some various targets, see what it'll do for you, all right?
Very rare opportunity. You'll never see these things shot in any video or anything like that. This is the only demonstration you'll probably ever see of these things.
Ben was only able to find a few of these, and so these things aren't made anymore, so we're shooting a museum piece here.
Pretty much, yeah.
Let's get to it.
These rounds are supposed to defeat level 2A soft body armor. The standard today for law enforcement is pretty much 3A. So we'll be using this level 2 fiberglass ballistic paneling. Now this is designed to stop most handgun rounds short of like a .357 or .44 Magnum, but also lead buckshot. The QB-8 round had no problem penetrating this barrier, but probably because of the age of these shells, the 8 wedges never separated. They all flew in one solid piece. Though it was impressive that it penetrated this fiberglass barrier, this shot was a poor example of how these were supposed to perform. Remember, the wedges are supposed to fly like buckshot, separate, and have 8 individual impact points. Once this mass penetrated the fiberglass barrier, they did break apart and separate. This is actually a better example of how the QB-Slug performs than the QB-8. Now the dummy is wearing a level 3A Kevlar vest. None of those penetrated that vest, but as you can see, the amount of damage is pretty substantial yet concentrated. Since the QB-8 is supposed to be a direct substitute for double-aught buckshot, we'll give that a try using this military-grade double-aught buckshot with a muzzle velocity of around 1,250 feet per second. The fiberglass ballistic paneling had no problem stopping the double-aught buckshot, but there was a tremendous amount of energy transfer. Now the paneling just buckled like it was made out of cardboard. Bear in mind that stuff is very stiff and very strong. With this cylinder bore shotgun at 10 yards, we had a pattern of about 3 to 4 inches. The paneling was pretty beat up, but if you were standing behind that, you'd still be alive. But probably not so much if the QB-8 was used. The 8 Quadrangle Buckshot still had a lot of energy to bury themselves pretty deeply into that level 3A Kevlar vest. We were able to dig out several of these Quadrangle Buckshot wedges, and they were completely undamaged and in perfect condition. Now they also claim these would defeat automotive safety glass. Now we didn't have any of that available to us at the time, so what we're going to be using is 1/2 inch polycarbonate. Now this is probably closer to level 1 protection, and with any luck we'll be able to get a second shot on this with double-aught buckshot. Now if you look closely, there is some new damage in the belly section of the ballistic dummy. In this shot we see the QB-8 function the way it's supposed to. The wedges actually separated this time. Oddly, the polycarbonate didn't shatter at the area of impact, but rather it was due to the ripple of energy kind of whipping it around and shattering it. 6 of the wedges did penetrate the polycarbonate. 2 of them kind of melted into it and failed to penetrate at all. Perhaps the largest factor of why some penetrated and why some didn't was simply due to the orientation of the wedges when they hit. Luckily, we have a large enough piece of the polycarbonate target left over that we can shoot it with some buckshot, just to give you an idea what that will do. Now we didn't expect the polycarbonate to shatter, but at least we have this to give you. The white granular stuff is called buffer, and that's there to prevent the soft lead buckshot from deforming when you shoot it. And again, the area where the impact actually occurred didn't shatter, it's the peripheral areas. Even though the polycarbonate was a little bit beat up and broken up, it did effectively stop most of the buckshot. Not all of it. While most of the pellets simply left a big dent in the polycarbonate, 2 or 3 of them managed to actually slip through. But for the most part, the pellets had very little energy left over once they passed through the polycarbonate. In fact, one of them was actually still stuck on the very surface of the Kevlar vest. So the QB-8 just barely outperformed the buckshot in this test. For this third test, we'll try to demonstrate how the Quadrangle Buckshot is designed to cut through hoses, wiring, cast aluminum parts, and actually disable a vehicle. So we have this aluminum plate, often called aluminium for the rest of the world because that's such a big deal to some people for some reason. But behind it we have a couple laptop hard drives, a bunch of wires, cables, metal pieces, and we've moved it back to about 12 yards or about 11 meters away. And hopefully this time we'll get a chronograph reading. And we got one this time, 1495 or 455 meters per second. And that's only about 6 or 7% slower than its stated velocity, which could be just due to the barrel length of the shotgun. But just like in the first shot, we have no separation of the wedges and just have one big hole in our plate. Now there's no shot cup holding these 8 wedges together. There's something that's causing them to stick together. Maybe it's a little bit of rust or who knows what. It's probably due to the age of these things though. So again, this shot is not a very good example of how these are supposed to function. and we thought by giving it a little more distance it would allow the slug to break apart, but it just never happened on this shot. And because of that, the damage is of course very localized. It had no problem blasting through the hard drive, severing cables, and had enough energy to embed itself deeply into the Kevlar body armor that the dummy was wearing. And none of the wedges had enough energy to penetrate the level 3A Kevlar vest. Some of the wedges that we're pulling out are a couple of the ones that we shot through the polycarbonate too. So in case you were screaming at us for not showing the damage of that, but some of the objects that were pulling out of the vest became projectiles and became embedded in the Kevlar vest too, such as the electrical plug. Now we only had 3 of these factory loaded shells. They're very rare and they were very expensive. But when we shot the QB-Slugs last year, we recovered enough of the wedges that I could actually get enough of them together to reload my own shell so we could have one more shot to show you guys. And I want to thank our viewers for giving me that suggestion. I probably wouldn't have even thought of doing that without you guys. So the purpose of this shot is to really give you an idea how the spread is supposed to happen with these things, and we did get a little better spread with this. And this also answers the question of how Greg got that white powder all over himself. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed watching this. We had a lot of fun making this video. Tell us in the comments section what we did wrong. I'm sure we did a lot of things wrong. Anyway, thanks again.